We're back. Okay, this is the slow reading video to accompany the week 6 topic, which is thinking about tradition and innovation in research, but particularly asking questions about why researchers pursue certain research questions over others. And to do that, we have this really interesting but very dense article by Jacob Foster, Andre Rzhetsky, and James Evans. Oh, sorry, I should not lean back like that because I go away from the mic. Foster, Rzhetsky, and Evans, their article, Tradition and Innovation in Scientists' Research Strategies, published in the American Sociological Review 2015, Volume 80, Issue 5, pages 875 to 908. I should say, starting out here, that the American Sociological Review is one of the big name sociology journals. This is a career publication, the kind of thing that, if I had a single article in that journal, I'd be like, cool, I've made a good contribution, and I can be happy. I'm yet to do that, I guess. Here's one note there. So I'm pretty much just going to read through this, and not all of it, of course. It's a long article. What have we got there? 34 pages of PDF. It's a 2-column PDF. Some of you might be familiar with that. 2 columns of text, so it's a lot of words. It's a very dense article. It's the kind of thing that I think actually should be divided into 2 separate articles. I think the authors and the editors made a mistake trying to pack heaps into this article. It would have been much nicer as 2 separate articles. Anyway, what I'm going to do is read the abstract, most of the introduction, and then we're going to look at the methods section and the conclusion, a little bit of the conclusion. I'm going to read, and I'm just going to talk as I read. Essentially, I'm just going to do a bit of a think out loud, essentially, while I read. Because what I'm trying to do here is to do a little bit of a modelling of the way I read for you guys to see how somebody who does this professionally has to do this. Obviously, what I'm not doing at the same time is like taking notes. Usually I'd be taking notes while I read. So you can think of some of my utterances as what I would be beginning to take notes on. And also, usually what I would do with an article like this is break it down into kind of reading sessions. So an article like this, I would probably parcel out a little bit of time just to read the intro, and then later in the day or on a separate day, I'd read the methods section, and then later I'd read the discussion section, and so on. Making each section of the article a little task, essentially. There's a great article by maths professor Robert Talbot on that, which I'd be happy to link anyone to if they're interested. So the program here is just to read through and see how, remembering, trying to figure out what's the article trying to do, what are the authors trying to say, and does it succeed? What are the problems with it, essentially? But for us as researchers as well, and researchers starting to think about research as something humans do, and something that we're trying to do. What does this paper do that helps us think better about research as a topic itself? And as ever, in RD1, often the focus on science here can be applied elsewhere. It's really highly focused in this particular article, so I don't think all of the strategies that the 3 authors apply in this article are applicable across fields. I think they've probably chosen methods that are specific to not just science, but the specific subfields in scientific research. But still, it's a really interesting piece to think with, and a really interesting way of thinking, well, how can we start to draw a picture for ourselves of the patterns of research that take place in a field of research. So let's get on with it. So as I said, the article title, always interesting to start with the title. The title should be the first kind of thing that tells you what the article is about, what the book is about. It should give you some signals. Tradition and innovation in scientists' research strategies. So tradition and innovation in the research strategies of scientists. Scientists in the broad sense there. So we can tell from the title straight away that the authors are trying to make a claim about scientists as a population of people, right? As scientists across the board, and whatever tradition and innovation mean in terms of the strategies of research that scientists across the spectrum, across the board, apply. So you can tell from the title the claim is big to start with. So, abstract. Often I like to read in this dark mode, but I won't for the purposes of this. No, I'll stick with normal. Because I'm not sure how it will render on your screens. But also, just before I begin, this article is in Views. So if you're reading along with me, head to Views, get it from the weekly content folder for week 6. And read along in your own PDF. Let's go. So the abstract. What factors affect a scientist's choice of research problem? What factors affect a scientist's choice of research problem? Qualitative research in the history and sociology of science suggests that this choice is patterned by an essential tension. Okay, so that must be a term, a phrase that they're going to explain later. An essential tension between productive tradition and risky innovation. So there's those two keywords in the title, productive tradition and innovation. But here they've said productive tradition and risky innovation. Okay. We examine this tension, that is the tension between productive tradition and risky innovation, through Bourdieu's field theory of science. Bourdieu is a sociologist, a French sociologist, very dense writer, who is quite popular at the moment in sociological theory. He has kind of come and gone in terms of popularity, but right now is back, theoretically speaking. Bourdieu's field theory. Field theory was one of Bourdieu's theories. Field theory of science. And we explore it empirically by analysing millions of biomedical abstracts from Medline. That sounds really colloquial, the way they put that, by analysing millions of biomedical abstracts from Medline, but they actually mean it very seriously. The data set is over 6 million abstracts in the Medline database. They could have written that a bit better in the abstract. We represent the evolving state of chemical knowledge with networks. Chemical knowledge. So we've gone field theory of science, empirical biomedical abstracts to chemical knowledge. I'd say it's a little bit kind of problematic writing. They've made a bunch of jumps there without really explaining it, but whatever. We represent the evolving state of chemical knowledge with networks extracted from these abstracts. We then develop a typology of research strategies. They've italicized that phrase there to signal to you, the reader, that this is something special. This is an unusual phrase that is probably going to come back again. It might be something that they explain in more detail later, you would hope. Typology of research strategies on these networks. Scientists can introduce novel chemicals and chemical relationships, innovation, or delve deeper into known ones, tradition. They can consolidate knowledge clusters or bridge them. The aggregate distribution of published strategies remains remarkably stable. High-risk innovation strategies are rare and reflect a growing focus on established knowledge. An innovative publication is more likely to achieve high impact than a conservative one, but the additional reward does not compensate for the risk of failing to publish. By studying prize winners in biomedicine and chemistry, we show that occasional gambles for extraordinary impact are a compelling explanation for observed levels of risky innovation. Our analysis of the essential tension, that is the thing that they signalled up above, identifies institutional forces that sustain tradition and suggest policy interventions to foster innovation. So I don't know about you, but I find that a very confusing abstract. It's like I can tell that what they're doing is studying abstracts to try and get a picture of a field of research. It's not entirely, if I were to read that through in one hit, having never read it before, I'd be a bit confused about which field of research they were interested in. I mean, chemical knowledge was talked about, but then they said biomedical abstracts, chemical relationships. In terms of methods, they mentioned network analysis, but I think it's a difficult abstract at best. So I've finished if I'm a naive reader, I've finished the abstract and I'm confused. That's not a good thing, I would say. Sorry to the authors if you ever watch this, but if you want an abstract tutorial, or even just my own opinion on how this abstract could be better, then feel free to contact me. Whatever. Let's head on to the article. And I should say, thinking about, to those in RD1, thinking about the issue of writing for readers, the thing that compels me to keep on reading is that I'm a person who's interested in why people do things, and particularly in the context of research, why researchers make certain research choices. All of that, for me, was conveyed in this first sentence. What factors affect a scientist's choice of research problem? Everything after that, for me, kind of didn't add to that question. If that one sentence hadn't have been in the abstract, I'd probably have walked away. To be completely honest, because it's a very confusing. It's not a confusing abstract. It's a really unclear abstract. All right, keywords are interesting. Let's have a look. Sociology of science, tradition, innovation, networks, generative models. Did they mention generative models before? Doesn't look like it. Nope. Biomedicine, citations, they haven't mentioned either. Awards and field theory. Field theory they mentioned. All right, let's get into it. This is the intro. Why do scientists pursue a particular research problem? It's a really interesting question. These decisions are consequential, not just for scientists, but for science itself. Indeed, the problem choice becomes more important as knowledge grows in scale and complexity. In an expanding universe of possible research questions, a topic that attracts intensive investigation is separated from neglected or abandoned topics by more than just the contours of nature. That is a thick sentence. In an expanding universe of possible research questions, that is, there's a whole universe out there, and we could ask any question about any aspect of that universe, right? And that universe is getting bigger for us as our knowledge of the universe increases. And they don't mean universe in the literal sense there. They just mean the universe of possible questions. So the idea is that the possible questions that we could ask is growing. But they are saying certain topics attract intensive investigation. And those topics are separated from other topics that don't receive intensive investigation by, and this is the interesting phrase, more than just the contours of nature. What does that mean? I interpret this to mean that the pattern of the world, the patterns of nature, are not sufficient for us to explain why research takes place the way it does. That might seem like a really straightforward observation, but another way to think of it is this. There's always a pattern. Everything has a pattern. Like random is is a very rare thing. In research, we don't do research randomly. Our choices in research are patterned, and that's what they're arguing towards, it would seem. Where our choices are patterned by things like what we're interested in, what our training is in, what resources we have available. But also, that sentence says to us, intense investigation separated from neglect or abandonment by more than the contours of nature. So nature itself, as in stuff other than humans, isn't sufficient to explain the way humans do research. So we need to look at humans to understand how humans do research and why. Scientists' choices, that is, the choices of all scientists, matter. In aggregate, patterned choices give, there's that phrase, gives scientific knowledge its shape and guide its future evolution. Research choice is central to many classic investigations in the sociology of science. While it... What's the it here? Research choice? Research choice is the subject of the previous sentence, so while research choice has received sustained attention in qualitative studies, research choice has been neglected in recent large-scale quantitative analyses. In this article, so here we are at last. So all of this is setting up. Scientists choose things, but not according to the patterns of nature, according to something else. In this article, we examine scientific choice quantitatively and at scale, using published claims in contemporary biomedicine to make inferences about underlying choices and dispositions. Cool, okay. That's a lot clearer than the abstract. So there they are saying, we're interested in the choices scientists make, and we're interested in doing it on a kind of broad, like population level, if possible. What we do is we look at a subset of the population and infer then generally out to the rest of the scientific population. That's what that last sentence of that paragraph means. Using published claims in contemporary biomedicine to make inferences about underlying choices and dispositions, to which they could add amongst scientists generally or something like that. As the qualitative and historical literature notes, many factors influence a scientist's choice of research problem. Some factors are particular to each scientist and range from past interests and training with new collaborators to serendipitous yet consequential encounters with new collaborators, expertise or information. Other factors are shared across groups of scientists. Local factors reflect institutional context or disciplinary culture. For example, scientists in a large department may be unconstrained because they lack a common paradigm. Those in an emerging subfield may be unconstrained because they have few accumulated assumptions. Scroll. It's one of the things I don't like about this paper. The thin paragraphs are really nice, but I wish it was a single paragraph per page. Single column per page, sorry. At the mesoscale, lie factors that influence everyone in a particular discipline or field. This is a citation to Bourdieu again. Like long-standing investments in particular methods and theories. So that is not financial investments, that's investments by people. That is, people chase or use a method or a theory, and their reputation and their career builds upon that. And so you would say that they've invested in that method or theory, like their career kind of rests on it. The characteristic trajectory of a scientific career also shapes research choice. Graduate students, assistant professors, and eminent scientists select problems in profoundly different professional contexts, venturing risks with varied stocks of accumulated scientific capital. That is to say, that a graduate student selects research problems in a different way to an assistant professor or somebody like me, like a junior burger in the research world, who chooses research problems in a different way to a senior and very successful professor. And that has to do with the kind of amount of what they've called scientific capital. They're referring to Bourdieu. They've got a citation to him. They're referring to Bourdieu's notion of capital there. You might have heard of the phrase social capital before, political capital. That's the kind of the idea that kind of like with financial capital, money or assets, you can acquire kind of reputational capital in a particular field. Accumulated scientific capital and varied opportunities to reap reward at the largest scale of factors affecting every contemporary scientist, like the valorization of original contributions. Valorization there means kind of upholding as a good thing, making it a good thing to do. So original contributions, novelty, newness, valorized, celebrated in the world of research. Whereas talking about things that have already been discovered is kind of less celebrated. These factors, that is all that have just been talked about, can be systematically assembled using Bourdieu's field theory of science. In this view, scientists occupy more or less dominant positions in a specific scientific field, depending on the amount and types of scientifically recognized capital they have accumulated. More or less dominant positions in a specific scientific field, depending on the amount and types of scientifically recognized capital they have accumulated. So I was about to ask about what they mean by capital or different types of capital here, but then they go on to say capital could be economic, e.g. grant money, or socially embedded, for example, relationships with important scientists and patrons. It could be cultural, involving familiarity with institutions, mores, and collective imagination of a field. Alternatively, scientists' capital could be technical, residing in skills, expertise, and intuition. Now, this is really important. Like, he can see that just having the skills, skills, expertise, and technical knowledge is not all that makes up the role of scientist. That's really interesting that they make that observation right at the start here. Right at the start, they're saying to be a scientist, you need grant money, you need relationships with other scientists at the very least, and preferably important ones and patrons if you want to be successful, I suppose. You have to be familiar with the institutions that you work in and its kind of mores, its rules, its ways of doing things, as well as the collective imagination of your field. That's what I talked about in the lecture on fields of research as communities of discourse. But also then you've still got to have the skills. Like you've got to have the skills, but you've also got to have all of the other stuff. 6 factors, really interesting. Or at least six groups of factors, I suppose. Scientists take a position, I wonder what they mean by that, by pursuing particular research problems selected from the space of all those possible. I think the key word there is possible. These concrete actions are guided by the interplay between scientists' positions in the field and their habitus. And they've italicized habitus to say that this is an unusual word, readers. Let us see if they explain it. Oh, habitus, acquired systems of tastes, dispositions, and expectations. So the colon says to you, what follows now is a definition. Acquired systems of tastes, dispositions, and expectations. At stake are recognition by fellow scientists, other currencies for which recognition can be traded, and an improved position in the field. So that is, what's at stake when you're making a research choice is recognition by fellow scientists, the accumulation of currencies, other capital, like grant money or relationships with people that you can use to help get recognition, and a general improvement in your standing, in the field, the field of like whatever research field you're in. Although long neglected by sociologists of science, Bourdieu's distinctive approach has recently experienced a renaissance, as I said before. See Norman 2020. This reappropriation largely rests on a move to relax the autonomy of a given scientific domain and explore both its interchange and with other domains and its hierarchical embedding in other fields. Well, that's a complex sentence, and I wonder what they mean by it. For example, okay, good. Bourdieu's approach. See, that's really, I'm being quite critical of the authors here, but that's really good writing. Complex sentence followed by the applied example. Let's see if the applied example works. For example, Bourdieu's approach has illuminated the idiosyncratic history of behavioural genetics. I think they mean the field of behavioural genetics, and early 20th century economics, the field of early 20th century economics. That's less good writing on their part. We adopt Bourdieu for a different reason. His field theory provides an organising framework for the wealth of data now available about the outcome and consequences of scientific choice. His field theory provides an organising framework, so we can organise our thinking using Bourdieu's field theory in order to deal with, we were going to have this framework, in order to deal with heaps of data about scientific outcome and consequences. Okay, cool. Using contemporary biomedicine as an example, we analyse the large-scale pattern of research claims and provide a strategic dispositional account of scientific choice, drawing on the rich published record of successful research choices and rewards. I'm not sure where my focus is supposed to go in that sentence. Using, we analyse, dispositional, drawing on. I was thinking about, the reader expectation theory and the work by Swan and Gopin that we talked about in week 0. That's a really good example of a sentence where it's not clear where our attention should go as readers. Like what are they trying to get us? What are the authors trying to get us to pay attention to here? It's not clear. We focus here, back to them. We focus here on the tension created by conflicting professional demands which map to distinct strategies for accumulating recognition and resources. Tension. So there's these professional demands about recognition and resources. So we're trying to get recognition and we're trying to get resources. And those things are in tension, is what they're saying. To remain in the research game, here we go, this is a bit of an explanation by the looks of it. To remain in the research game requires productivity. Scientists typically achieve this by incremental contributions to established research directions. Cool. So that is normal science right there, in Kuhn's understanding. Incremental contributions to established research directions. That's normal science, classic Kuhn. Oh, and there's a citation to Kuhn down below. Boom. This may yield enough recognition to maintain a relatively low position. Achieving high status, by contrast, requires original and transformative contributions often attained by pursuing risky new directions. Those are paradigm-shifting research directions, one might say. Although probably not in the kind of broadest Kuhnian sense. These conflicting demands create a tension between two broad strategies, productive tradition and risky innovation. So that's the two phrases that the authors used in the abstract at the beginning, which is the typical location of an abstract. When following a conservative strategy and adhering to a research tradition in their domain, scientists achieve publication, that's a strange phrase, with high probability. Oh, that's interesting. So when scientists are conservative and go along with tradition, they are likely to be published. They remain visibly productive, but forego opportunities for originality. So, colleagues, remember that like the currency of the academic world and of research is the publication. So that's an interesting observation for us. If scientists are conservative and follow along with tradition, they're likely to get published. Publication is key. When following a risk-taking strategy, scientists fail more frequently. That is, fail to get published. Remember, they probably should have said that. They may appear unproductive for long periods, like the 7 years, Andrew Weil spent proving Fermat's last theorem, or the decade Frederick Sanger invested in developing the Sanger method of DNA sequencing. Both classic examples of unproductive and risky innovation, to use the framework that these authors are setting up. If a risky project succeeds, however, it may have a profound impact, generating substantial new knowledge and winning broad acclaim. Again, citing Kuhn. This strategic tension is repeatedly articulated as a dichotomy in the sociology of science as reliable succession versus risky subversion, or relevance versus originality. In the philosophy of science as conformity versus dissent or discipline versus rebellion. And in the study of innovation as exploitation versus exploration. Exploitation, that's interesting. Recent theoretical work supports this broad structure by highlighting the distinctive contributions and rewards associated with traditional versus innovative strategies. So what they're doing is setting out the here they're setting out the field. You see how they're doing history of the field? Like, people before us have been interested in why scientists make choices. They've studied these things, they've studied these things, they've studied these things. In this article, we explore the essential tension at scale, studying 6.5 million abstracts in biomedicine. We extend and elaborate Kuhn's account of the essential tension using Bourdieu's field theory. So there they're setting up the theoretical framework with which they do the work. We argue that tradition and innovation label distinct regions of the space of possible research claims or position takings. That's interesting. I genuinely hadn't noticed that they used position for claim there in the way that I do in the week 3 lectures. Scientists anticipate a certain risk and reward profile from each region. Through their choice of research problem, scientists invest in a particular mixture of tradition and innovation. Our empirical, here we go, so now we're really getting into the methods, I assume, seeing as they're talking about 6 steps. Our empirical analysis follows 6 steps. 1, we show how networks can be used to map the evolving landscape of chemical knowledge in biomedicine. Interesting. 2, we identify clusters of knowledge within that map and demonstrate their stability, that is, the stability of the clusters. I should say, as somebody who's done some network analytic research, that makes a lot of sense, but if you haven't done any network analysis, you probably don't know what they're talking about. If we read on, I'm sure they'll explain. We define a simple structural typology of research strategies corresponding to tradition and innovation, and we show that the distribution of published strategies is remarkably stable. 4, we use a simple probabilistic model to measure the broad habits of perception, attention, and choice, the habitus, that constrain research activity and support stability. Habits of perception, attention, and choice. That needs explaining. We quantify the relationship between strategy, risks, and rewards, in brackets, citation. So they're saying citation is a reward of some kind, using several regression models. And 6, we explore citation accumulation and awards. Awards, not rewards. I wonder what they mean by awards. As incentives that discipline scientists' choices and help structure the field. Let's pay attention to that language here. as incentives that discipline scientists' choices. So here is where the kind of ambiguity of the English language is both beautiful and problematic for us. There they mean discipline in the sense of as a verb, as in to discipline someone, to make sure that they do something in a particular way, to chide, to criticise. So what they're saying there, we explore citation, accumulation and awards as incentives. So because there are these rewards that exist, those rewards then stop people from doing things that wouldn't get them those rewards. It's like the opposite of a fine. If you paid people for driving the speed limit, for example, would kind of be what they're talking about there, as an example of the kind of award as discipline rather than fine as discipline. It is a speeding fine. This matrix of incentives maintains the essential tension and is manifest in both the stable distribution of published research choices and the underlying habitus shaping them. This article makes distinct contributions to... So here they are then zooming back out. Why does this matter? Well, let's zoom out. Distinct contributions to the sociology of science, the study of networks, and quantitative methodology. Quantitative methodology. I think they mean quantitative methods in sociology, and in sociology of science, but maybe they mean quantitative methods broadly. It provides the first large-scale test of a key hypothesis in the sociology of science, the essential tension, drawing on a dataset of unusual size and quality to connect the structure of scientific content to multiple forms of reward, including citations and awards. We also... That's a strange... Well, I guess it's forgivable, but firstly it's this article, and then... So third person and then first person, but anyway. We also make new connections between important, although sometimes unfashionable, streams of theory and extend Bourdieu's internal approach to the scientific field in new directions. Methodologically, extend Bourdieu's internal approach to I'm not sure what that means. Methodologically, we develop and deploy quantitative approaches for operationalizing key concepts in the sociology of science, for example, position taking, field and habitus. Concretely, we demonstrate that contemporary network analytic methods, here we go, can be extended beyond citations to map the structure of content, scientific and otherwise, at very large scale. Okay, so a lot of the research that's taken place, that's Courtney just messaging about this reading. Courtney as in one of the people in RD1. A lot of the research that's taken place on using network analytic theory with regards to research has looked at citations only. Here they're saying we're actually looking at the content of the articles to do our network analysis. We also show how concepts from information theory and techniques of probabilistic modelling can be used to quantify rich qualitative concepts like novelty and the scientific habitus. Above all, our core question, how do I choose what to study, is of reflexive interest to all scholars and scientists. Word. I wholeheartedly agree with that last sentence. That core question, how do I choose what to study, is interesting. And their contention, it would seem, is that there are structures of incentive. Based on this introduction, there are structures of incentive and award and reward that serve to discipline our choices. That is, make it more likely that we think it's good to choose certain topics and good to choose certain questions and less good to choose other questions. So I won't read about this. This is the kind of literature review now. They're discussing their theoretical and methodological frameworks. The essential tension, that is Kuhn. They begin with Kuhn, introduce the notion of the essential tension. And scientific habitus is Bourdieu. Let's scroll down here. Knowledge networks and network strategies. This will be network theory. We might see Page cited, as in Larry Page from Google. Data, methods, and results. Okay, let's have it. Well, so let's just have a quick look at this. Well, that's them discussing what a network is. Data, methods, results. Our analysis follows 6 distinct steps and connects to the vignette of our practicing scientist. Our analysis follows 6 distinct steps and connects to the vignette of our practicing scientist described earlier. In brief, our broad goals are as follows. Map the space of chemical knowledge and identify the prevalence and stability of the various strategies. Construct a simple behavioural model of scientific attention that relates strategy prevalence with opportunity. Measure risks and rewards associated with various strategies using citations. And explore 2 potential motivational mechanisms for scientists' choices, maximising citations and seeking outsized recognition. Note, our data reveal only the outcome of successful choices. This is an important limitations paragraph that they really should draw more attention to. Note that our data reveal only the outcome of successful choices, that is, published papers. We have no way, and this is really interesting for us to think about in terms of the history of all research fields. We have no way of accessing specific choices which may fail, or specific dispositions, a problem shared by other field theoretic analyses. Which is to say, all we get is the tip of the iceberg in the publication record. Like, all of this work that goes on in research, in science and scholarship, is hidden because the only record that we have easily available, at least for big quantitative studies like this one, is the publication record. Terrific constraint and problem and limitation for a paper like this. As a result, our paper strictly documents the pattern of successful choices and their association with various rewards. And from this, we make inferences about underlying dispositions and choices. So that's pretty reasonable. Like, they're saying that based on the evidence that we have, these are the inferences we can make. And the evidence that they have, according to the questions that they're asking, is the publication record only, limited as that may be. So here's just briefly what are they actually studying? So their data set is this. Our network is built from 6,455,756 abstracts in the National Institutes of Health National Library of Medicine's Medline collection, published from 1934 to 2008. That's a bit of a fib. They're not actually doing all of those in this. Annotated by the National Library of Medicine with 2 or more chemical entities. I've looked up that supplemental material and it's actually not very helpful. Chemical annotations were introduced in 1980 and applied to all articles indexed subsequently. So see, they've said published from 1934 to 2008, but actually they're dealing with a subset of that data. That's why I find it misleading, because they're just saying, look, we've analysed 6.5 million abstracts, but no, they didn't. We focus analysis on 1983 to 2008 to limit the effect of the introduction of chemical annotations on our results. It's not clear why it's not 1982 to 2008 or 1984 to 2008, but it doesn't matter, I would say, because they're not quite sure what the effect is or what might cause it anyway, but they're just trying to say, we think it's possible that there might be an effect of introducing this new way of doing things, so we're going to wait a couple of years in the data that we have before we start our analytical discussion. So they could have analysed the data set from 1980 to 2008, but they chose to wait 3 years, 83 to 2008. We construct an evolving network from these annotated articles. For each year, T, we examine all abstracts published in that year for chemical annotations. Each distinct chemical is a node in the network. That's one of the dots in the network graph. Every time 2 chemicals appear in the same abstract in year T, we add a link between the corresponding nodes in the network for year T plus 1. So when two chemicals appear in the year T, they're two dots, and on the graph they're two dots, and when they appear together in the same abstract, there'll be a line joining them. That's what they're saying. Note that articles are often annotated with more than two chemicals, and therefore contribute more than one chemical relationship. For example, an abstract annotated with 5 chemicals would correspond to an additional 10 links in the network. Yada, yada, yada. Course analysis. They've used that phrase. They use that phrase a few times. So here, this is interesting. A procedure maps the rapidly growing network of chemical knowledge, published tradition, atop the space of possible chemical relationships. The number of chemicals has grown steadily since annotations were introduced in 1980. By 2008, I wish they would tell us how big the network was in 1980, but anyway. By 2008, the network has 181,000 nodes, that is 181,078 distinct chemical entities or chemicals, and 10,493,379 distinct links, that is relationships between two or more chemicals. That would be like there are 181,000 people and 10.5 million relationships in a community, in a society, which is possible when you think that you have groups of friends, people that you work with, relatives. It's possible to have multiple relationships with multiple people in different ways. Like many complex networks, the network of chemical knowledge is characterized by a heavy-tailed distributions of degrees, number of chemicals to which a given chemical is connected, and link weights. That's complex network analytical stuff. Cool. So that's just to kind of brief you. That's the data set, community detection. So this is the kind of visualization of their analysis of the data. The top graph there is what's called an alluvial graph. I find alluvial graphs really often really unhelpful, as in very hard to read. It's hard to know the specifics, although you get a good general picture of what's going on. Whereas I find the next level, the network graphs, just down here, I find them easier to read for specifics, even if a general picture sometimes is a bit harder to determine. One of the things that's really interesting about this, and this is just a kind of, I think, illustrative graphs on their part, is one of the limitations of the technology here. So the publisher is still producing a PDF in paginated form, and a network graph is much better done not printed on a page. This is still publication that assumes the printed page as its medium, and I think it's well past time for the Academy to move beyond the printed page. We have such interesting technology to be able to work with in terms of publication now. I wish we would move beyond it. Anyway, rant over. What's interesting here is that the central node, core bio, which refers to core biological chemicals, tritium, calcium, glucose, so on, remains central, core bio, throughout the data, 83 to 2003 here. But look what happens, look what kind of really comes in. That's ugly, isn't it? There we go. Core bio, good, yep, neurotransmitters, immune system, whatever, but then here, DNA appears. And DNA isn't here in 1983. This is in the network of chemical annotations in the NLM database. And it grows. It gets more prevalent here, connecting strongly with the immune system and core bio. And here, by 2003, and this over this period, especially here, 1990 to 2003, is the Human Genome Project. And you can see it really comes to kind of co-dominate the network. So this, I think, really demonstrates something that the authors are talking about, is that we can get a picture for the way a research field kind of takes place, at least looking back historically, through something, a piece of data as simple as a chemical annotation to an abstract. Let's just scroll down. I'll leave you guys to read the methods. This is a detailed methods section because it's really, like I said at the beginning, the paper is 2 papers in one. Really, the network analysis should have been a single paper, and then the kind of broader sociological analysis should have been a second paper. I guess I understand why they combined it all in one, but it just makes for a huge paper and really complex to kind of hold everything in your kind of mind at the same time. What am I looking for? So here is where they statistically model the sociological theory, try to connect the data to sociological theory, and they use some interesting statistical analyses to help them. Risk and reward. I won't go into that. Lots of interesting and delicious problems for you to think about. Please go and read. Motivations is the thing that really gets a lot of MRes students. The assumptions that the authors make about scientists' motivations. Trips people up. This is pretty interesting as a graph. This is mapping the types of relationships in the network, which we haven't got into yet, but essentially they say there are basically 5 types of network relationships, characterized here along the x-axis in these 4 graphs, and that citation and award and reward map really strongly onto innovative jumps versus traditional jumps, is the argument that they make. Again, the tradition versus innovation. Normal science versus paradigm shifting work. Paradigm shifting, much more likely to get prizes, much more likely to get citations. Normal science, still going to get citations, but just an award, but less frequently. Discussion, cool, so let's read from here. Taken together, our results provide strong quantitative evidence that scientists' choices of research problem is indeed shaped by their... Sorry, I tripped myself up there. I made choice plural. So let's start again. Taken together, our results provide strong quantitative evidence that scientists' choice of research problem is indeed shaped by their strategic negotiation of an essential tension between productive tradition and risky innovation. Kuhn's basic picture, when enriched with Bourdieu's conception of research choice as strategic action and his notion of scientific habitus, provides a compelling framework in which to understand our findings. Using a network representation of chemical knowledge, we demonstrated that biomedical chemistry is in a normal science regime, with conservative strategies, tradition, common, and riskier strategies, innovation, rare. This conservatism is further supported by our finding that knowledge is crystallized into stable knowledge clusters. The distribution of research claims is also remarkably stable. This would be surprising if scientists attended only research opportunities, but becomes entirely expected if their choices are shaped by a complex of socially inflected dispositions and incentives. Using a simple behavioural model, we relate these stable choices to exploding opportunities for biomedical novelty, and we measure the growing biases that focus scientists on the known. So biases that make sure people study tradition, what's known, and kind of flesh out what's known. We then provide a quantitative analysis of some of the incentives that undergird those biases. In this we confirm that innovation strategies are not only rare but also more highly rewarded and, in all likelihood, more risky. Finally, we sketch out and quantitatively confirm two motivational explanations for tradition and innovation. We find that a disposition towards tradition is plausibly adapted to maximising productivity and reliably accumulating scientific capital, while a disposition towards occasional innovation is motivated by a gamble for posterity. Well, that's interesting. Let's read that again. We find that disposition towards tradition is plausibly adapted to maximising productivity and reliably accumulating scientific capital. So if a scientist is disposed towards less risk, towards innovation, they'll be productive. They'll produce a lot of papers. But if they're disposed towards risk and innovation, they'll produce less. But also, and this is the contentious part of the article, I would say, they're motivated by a gamble for posterity and a desire to achieve higher position in the field. I mean, I read out the kind of summary of the methods. Were they measuring? This is a question that gets me every time I read this paper. Were they measuring desire? Scientists' desire? No, they weren't. So, I mean, they say at the beginning, like, it's an inference that they draw, but I think that's a step too far. Anyway, we believe our results taken as stylized facts about stability, dispositions, risk, reward, and motivational mechanisms are robust to the necessary modelling assumptions we made and the limitations of the data outlined in the next section. So I've paused and read this section because of those claims that they've made. You know, a set of claims that are more reasonable and then one that is, I think, a bit much. Conclusions. Nice shortish conclusion. I won't read all of it. We'll just read the start and the end of the conclusion. Understanding the research process remains a central challenge for science studies. Science studies is the study of science. But the study of science is a thing. Like religious studies is what I am in. Science studies is a similar field. It looks at science. And it's not just sociology of science or history of science or philosophy of science. It's, broadly speaking, all of those things and others. Central challenge for science studies, and improved understanding will be key to improved science policy. That's a really interesting thing to put in the end of the paper for them, that if we understand science better, we can help governments do science policy better. And I think that's a really, really important note. Like, it's one of the reasons why we shape the core units of the MRes like we do, is to orient you towards understanding the thing more broadly, so that if you end up going into a role that isn't in the academy, you can hopefully have some understanding that will help you, because you might end up in government or industry. You can hopefully have some understanding that'll help you shape things like policy and business practice. Science is a complex system, and new methods like ours can identify some of the processes that govern its evolution. Calling back to Kuhn, interestingly there, as I mentioned at the beginning, our research suggests one reason why unexpected findings that change the landscape of science are infrequent. Pursuing innovation is a gamble, without enough payoff on average to justify risk. Nevertheless, science benefits when individuals overcome the dispositions that orient them towards established islands of knowledge in the expanding ocean of possible topics. Look at that poetry. That orient them towards established islands of knowledge in the expanding ocean of possible topics. Early breakthroughs in literature-based discovery illustrated the power of linking islands of knowledge together. Our results explain why such discovery methods remain fruitful. To be sure, not all scientists should pursue risky strategy. Normal science that characterises a known relationship more deeply has its own value as recognised by Kuhn. Nevertheless, stimulating innovation is an important goal of science policy, and we suggest 2 policy levers to promote risk-taking. So I'll leave you to read that because it's really interesting. Actually, no, I'll read it now. The first involves decoupling job security from productivity. Like, how does that sound, everyone? Like, seriously, this is what so many of us talk about. And here they're providing not just a rhetorical argument, they're providing a quantitative, data-based, data-informed argument. It's really, really good to see sociology like this being done. The first involves decoupling job security from productivity, which can encourage originality, as was the case of Bell Labs. If any of you don't know what Bell Labs is, go and look up the Wikipedia page. It is one of the most interesting moments in scientific history. In fact, I have a book here that I borrowed from Jack. I might have told you guys about this. This is a book about this guy, Claude Shannon. It's his master's thesis that causes all of this, ones and zeros. His master's thesis helped establish basically the digital age. And he was associated with, I think, and worked at Bell Labs for a little while. So to return to the article, so can funding scientists rather than projects, as at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. I read that with the wrong intonation. So can funding scientists rather than projects, as at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and a new family of grants at the National Institutes of Health. These policies follow from the insight that career pressure presents a powerful incentive for conservative behaviour. That's really important. These policies follow from the insight that career pressure, that is, if you feel like your career is under threat, you're much more likely to go down conservative roads, much less likely to choose risky scientific projects. That is much more likely to do normal science, applied science, much less likely to do basic science and paradigm shifting science. Really important finding, or at least really important implication of the finding of this research. That's important to separate. This isn't a finding of the research. This is an implication of the finding, implication of the kind of discussion of the data. The other lever sits outside the tension between productivity and posterity. Agencies can lower the barriers to risky projects by funding them more aggressively, like the Gates Foundation. These interventions may be able to counter the stable conservatism we uncover here. I'll leave you guys to read the rest, but I will read the last paragraph. Methodologically, so they're wrapping the paper up, remembering that they've made all of these policy proposals in the conclusion section, but now they're kind of trying to bring it back to, this is the American Sociological Association, trying to bring it back to sociology. Methodologically, our analysis makes 3 contributions. First, it provides a template for applying the machinery of network analysis to scientific content and suggests that such methods can be fruitfully applied to other forms of content, that is, potentially to other disciplines, fields, and so on. Second, it demonstrates that if one is willing to tolerate simplification, rich sociological constructs, like the habitus, can be represented in formal models and measured. That's a really interesting claim. On large scales, extending the quantitative aspects of Bourdieu's program beyond correspondence analysis is another kind of method, and creating surprising connections with analytic sociology. Finally, our paper argues for the utility of simple probabilistic models of behaviour coupled with maximum likelihood inference. Such generative models are a happy compromise between the behavioural plausibility of agent-based models and the closeness to data of classical regression analysis. And there is much room for extending our simple generative model to incorporate rich representations of individual dispositions and field positions. So they're saying we could bring other data in essentially. To put it reflexively, and that is to apply, what they actually mean by that is to apply our own findings to ourselves, our paper is grounded in several traditions, see what they did there, from the sociology of science, network analysis, and statistical modelling. In making novel connections within and between them, it contributes substantive or methodological innovations to each. That is, that they're saying, kind of like a little bit of a boom-ch, they're saying our paper is both kind of traditional and risky. The end. All right, so I'm not even sure how long this has gone for. I'm just scrolling here. Look at all these endnotes. This is a really big, complex article for a lot of people. It's best done in a few sittings as a reading. I encourage you to go and read the methods section and see if you can follow along with it and think about how it might apply to your field. Why don't we go back up to the top, because that's a better thing to look at. See how it can apply to your own field. And more to the point, think about how would you try and study your own field of research? I mean, the first example of that question is the classic literature review that we all have to do. We all have to discuss the work that's gone before us in our own field. But what other ways could we study your field of research? Could we do something with network methods like these authors have done? Can you think of other ways that we can study your field? What's the data? What data does your field produce? Presumably it produces publications like every other field, but are there any other outputs? Is there anything else that we could take as data for your field? That is, for all of us, the question, like, how might we discern the patterns of behaviour for your field of research so that you, can understand how to enter into that field and become a participant and hopefully shape the field in the future for the better. So with that, let's bring it to a close. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you keep reading. See you online in class. Stay well, everyone, and be well.